The contentious fight over Donald Trump's huge spending bill has reopened the belligerent battle between the president and Elon Musk. The bromance gone bad breaking out over social media, with Musk promising that nearly the entire House and Senate GOP will lose their primary next year if it is the last thing I do on this earth. Trump firing back with a threat of his own, suggesting that without federal subsidies, quote, Elon would probably have to close up shop and head back home to South Africa. Whatever happens between them, individual Democrats see a potential opening. Colin Allred, who ran a strong but losing campaign against Ted Cruz last year, is now planning to make another run next year.
I'm Colin Allred, and today I'm announcing my candidacy for the United States Senate, because you deserve someone who will fight for you. I get it. Real change might feel impossible, but I'm not giving up.
Could this be the start of a Democratic rush? Joining us now is Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. Reed Galen is an independent political strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Michael Hardaway is with me here in studio, former communications director and spokesman for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. Great to have you all here. Peter, Elon Musk is playing the one card that he does have against the Republicans, and that is money for primary challenges. We're already seeing how it annoys the president, but will it work with Republicans?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Basically, Republicans coming to this vote today understood that Musk was on the other side of Trump and chose Trump. I mean, with the three Republicans who went otherwise, the rest of them all went with Trump. Not that they agree with him necessarily, and not that they necessarily, favor all the aspects of this bill, but they remain loyal to the president, even though the richest man on the planet is threatening to primary at least some of them if they go the other way. So they obviously are more afraid, I would say, of Trump than they are afraid of Musk at this point. We'll see whether Musk follows through on what he says he's going to do. You know, he's kind of lashed out and then kind of backed off and then lashed out again. And we're a long ways away from next year. But I think Republicans at the moment feel like Trump has more control over their party and more sway with their voters than Elon Musk does, even with his billions of dollars.
Musk had gone largely quiet since the very public breakup with Donald Trump. And that was when the president threatened to cut off his federal contracts. But here he is again today.
He's losing his EV mandate, and he's very upset about things, but, he could lose a lot more than that. We might have to put Doge on Elon. You know what Doge is? Doge is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Wouldn't that be terrible? He gets a lot of subsidies.
You've written about this. What does this portend, if anything, besides fodder for headlines?
Well, I mean, look, we'll see whether it's just trolling or an actual threat. But the truth is, we should not forget just how out of the norm this is. For a president of the United States to threaten to use government power to punish somebody because they dissent from his policies is anathema to a lot of what certainly what other presidents would have considered to be appropriate, Republican or Democrat. What you hear President Trump saying here is he could potentially cut off federal contracts because he doesn't like what Elon Musk is saying. And in fact, even suggesting he might have to leave the country, being a South African native. That's extraordinary. And we shouldn't lose sight of just how out of the norm that really is.
Thank you for that. A reminder that sometimes all of this just seems like more of the same. Hello, Michael. So it's not just those two who are in it. Trump's former White House advisor, Steve Bannon, not necessarily a big fan of Elon Musk, but he had this to say. Take a listen.
This was the guy that told the president he was going to get $2 trillion of waste, fraud, and abuse cuts. Then he backed it off to $1 trillion. And this was on an annual basis. This wasn't over 10 years. We haven't seen the $160 billion. What we do is have a $9 billion rescission, and all of that is programmatic. I haven't seen anything specifically fraud and abuse put forward from the Pentagon or anywhere.
So what do Democrats do with this? Should they just stay out of the way, let the GOP go at each other, or is there something there politically?
Let the nerds fight it out. But Democrats should message as to why this is important. Doge was a failure in that it didn't really turn on any real federal waste. And there is an opportunity for Democrats to step forward and say, let's fix the government. Let's make it more efficient in a bipartisan way. they should also again point to the fact that this is yet another failure of this president and another sort of facet of chaos that he likes to engage in. It's all part of a larger plan where you just have nothing that works efficiently under Donald Trump.
There's something beyond individual primarying, Reid, that Musk is threatening, I guess. He's promising to launch a new political party. How serious of a threat do you think that really is? And let's just say history shows us that starting a new political party has not gone well for others.
Well, no, and as someone who has tried to do that myself, I can promise you it's not. The difference here is, Chris, is that I dollars at my back. Now, all 50 states have different rules for how you can start a new political party. And a lot of them, like where I live, Utah is basically just filing, and we don't have campaign finance rules, so he could do a lot here. But what I could say is that he could fund a lot of independent candidates to run in a general election in some of these very contested Republican seats and try and get people to split the vote. And it very well could work. He doesn't care. And the funny thing, too, is that I'm not sure that Trump necessarily cares about who loses. He just doesn't want to lose to Elon Musk. He doesn't really care about individual members so much as that he gets to keep control over as many people as he can. So the third party thing, again, if it was going to happen, he could do it, but it's very, very difficult. It gets harder after you actually get the party on the books, because then you have to have candidates and everything else. But again, most of them in the past either were predicated on something like the Dixiecrat ticket in 1948 with Strom Thurmond, or Ross Perot that had a grassroots movement in 1992. None of them ever had the richest man in the world at their back.
Good point. Money does talk. And meantime, Michael, we saw what Colin Allred has decided. Now, obviously, that was something he was already considering doing. But I wonder, as they watch the political landscape shifting, if there are other Democrats who, under other circumstances months ago, might have said, I don't know if it's worth it, maybe considering getting back in. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, and by the way, Colin Allred personifies everything Democrats need right now. He's a guy, he's a man's man. He's a brilliant guy with an incredible story. Democrats need to field more candidates.
Both true, but he lost pretty significantly, certainly more significantly than the previous Cruz race.
That's true, but I'll say this. Most successful politicians lose one or two or three times. That's the first thing. The second thing is, he's running statewide in Florida, which has never elected a black person in that capacity. I do think he has a real chance in winning. I've talked to a lot of donors since the beginning of this year that are trying to figure out what to do. And my advice is fund candidates like Colin Allred. He's incredibly talented. And we should build out that bench of people just like him who have real life experience, working class family. He's got this really interesting story. We need better stories.
Well, there's something interesting that he just said, Reid, which is obviously, if you look at a Colin Allred, he is significantly younger than not just the person that he would be replacing, but significantly younger generally than folks in Congress. And I'm wondering if, I don't want to read too much into what happened in a mayoral race in New York City, right? But we saw what can motivate young voters. They want people who have a little different message. They want people who are very economically tuned in. And they want people, frankly, it seems often, who look more like them, who are younger and have more energy. Is there something there?
Well, I think there is. And the biggest threat to Democrats, I think, in 2026, to your point, Chris, is that they don't see enough people like them or hear enough things that they believe are going to make a bigger and better impact on their lives. And they just stay home altogether. Look, I think Allred's a good guy. I think he's a good candidate, all things considered. It's Texas, so take that for what it's worth. But also, look, if Democrats want to be better, then they got to get away from poll-tested pablum and focus group, BS when it comes to talking about this stuff. He doesn't need to spend more time in Dallas. He needs to spend more time in the piney woods of East Texas and the deserts of West Texas. He needs to get out to places where people don't see politicians, Democrat or otherwise. And I would say this is that, look, if it's Colin Allred versus John Cornyn, who knows? If it's Colin Allred versus the crazy AG Ken Paxton down there, who knows? It's going to be a contested Democratic primary. What I would say is that probably the bench that you need to build is not at the United States Senate level. It's at those places in the state House and state Senate seats and county commission seats that have really gone fallow for the last 10 or 15 years in the Democratic Party. We're on the beach here as far as the pro-democracy side is concerned. They got to go start winning in some places, or at least competing in some places that they've given up on for years to come.
Well, competing is a big thing. I've covered many a state legislative race where you have a lot of seats that are not even contested. That has changed a little recently. Reed Galen, great to have you on the show. Peter Baker, Michael Hardaway, you're going to stay with us.